This is a public health announcement brought to you by Heather Shepard.
The Primal Pioneer. Live an outdoor life.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Primal Pioneer. I'm your host, Heather Shepard. Today you're listening to episode 10. And during this episode, I interview world-renowned naturopathic oncologist, Dr. Nasha Winters. This episode is a must-listen for anyone with cancer, looking to prevent cancer, or if you know a friend, a loved one, a family member with cancer. This is going to be a really eye-opening episode to help you get into some deep layers that may be causing your particular experience with cancer. During this episode, Dr. Winters and I talk about the importance of treating each person from a very unique individual place that's based on their own terrain. And Dr. Winters goes into great detail about what this looks like, what it looks like to treat the terrain. What does terrain even mean? How does your terrain impact your susceptibility to diseases like cancer? We'll go into all of this during the show today. And we'll also get into really important cancer topics such as diet. We mention keto, we mention the Gerson diet. We talk a lot about vitamin D and sunlight, and Dr. Winters brings up a very important, crucial piece of all healing, including cancer healing, which is this mental, emotional piece that often gets overlooked in the healing journey. So we'll dive into those realms as well. So I'm super stoked to have Dr. Winters on the show today. She is a cancer survivor herself, and I don't even want to say survivor. She's thriving right now in all aspects of her life, and her story is a truly remarkable one, which she'll share here in the beginning of this episode. But basically, she was given a diagnosis of stage 4 ovarian cancer. The doctors told her she was in organ failure. There's nothing they could do to help her. It was too late for chemo, too late for radiation, any standard of care they could offer her. And they basically told her, go home, get your affairs in place, and prepare to die. And 28 years later, Dr. Winters is now helping people approach cancer from this place of terrain, from a root place, to really help access root causes of each individual's experience with cancer. So enjoy this episode. Today on the show, I have Dr. Nasha Winters. Did I get that right pronunciation?
You did. Thank you.
Yeah. So Dr. Winters, welcome. Super excited to have you here, excited to talk about cancer. You're most known as a naturopathic oncologist. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Thanks. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Just love the work that you do, what you share with everyone. You have a great book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. I just put it in my Amazon cart today. I'm super It's taken me far too long to read that book, but I'm stoked to do so, and I'm excited to get into some of those topics here to help people gain a clearer, more focused approach to cancer. There's a lot of information out there on cancer. You can Google Gerson diet, treatments for cancer, and get 20 million in 3 different things. So let's give some people some clarity here, huh?
Sure. Well, before we do, I just want to, I didn't do this with you beforehand because I would like this to be recorded for your listeners to hear. First of all, I am so insanely grateful to meet you in person because I am on a lot of forums. I'm out there reading a lot of material. And even if you guys don't know it, I'm usually just a fly on the wall looking through things. And I only kind of really jump in if there's something that's so glaringly, scarily off base that I can't help but not bite my tongue. And Heather, the things you say and do are so in alignment and so right spot on. I'm really impressed with your knowledge and your life learning, desire, and so many people that you've already been helping with your work and your passion. And I just want to say thank you. And I'm very excited to be here with you today.
That's so moving. Thank you so much. It's really great to hear that. I appreciate it so much coming from you, right back at you. The community out there that I'm on and social media, they just rave about you and your work, how it's touched their lives. I'm serious. And I agree that it seems like it's taken us a while to connect. And it seems like our paths cross with a lot of different people on out there in the world. So it's really, thank you for sharing that and right back at you.
Yeah, and for your listeners also, our paths are going to cross a little bit more because we're going to be snowbirding it this winter in the same neck of the woods. So we talked about maybe doing a podcast live together while we're sipping on our keto margaritas on the beach. No.
Oh my gosh. Listen, I have an awesome recipe for coconut nectar, homemade coconut milk. So I think I'll take you up on that.
That's good. I'm loving this. This is so great.
Yeah. So very cool. Excited about that. And, you yourself have had an absolutely insane journey with cancer yourself. Like, I listened to your story on another podcast a while back, and I was like, how does anyone survive all of that? And like, that to me is so moving and is like, you're here for a serious purpose around healing, around cancer. And I'd love to share whatever you feel inspired to, whatever you feel called to, because I know you probably shared your personal story 2,000 times plus, but whatever you feel called to share, I think it'd be really helpful for the listeners here to get an idea of where you've come from.
Awesome. No, I feel that, first of all, I learn from other people's stories, and I feel like my job in this world is to be a story collector and to sort of just be present with people in their journey. And it always inspires. I always learn something. So I have no problem sharing, tidbits of where I've come from and what's been going on. The one thing I always want to let listeners know is I'm not the story. I am of the story. I've come from the story. So I think that's really important that I don't sit there and still sort of associate myself with that time and place of where this is. I'm a work in process. I'm constantly dynamic and moving and changing. And my cells today are not what they were 3 months ago, 3 years ago, 3 decades ago.
Yes.
So I recognize that I am not at all the person that, I'm probably at the core on some essential spiritual level, that person, but on the physiologic level, I know that I am very dynamic and can change at any given time. So to start the story with that, so folks recognize that even if you're looking at some of the worst, crazy traumas or experiences or diagnoses or physical challenges right now, that it's transient, that it's a moment in time, it's a snapshot. So please hold that in those moments when you're getting really overwhelmed by the story, right? So there's that. So I kind of came into this world already problematic. I jokingly, you probably heard me say on podcasts, my mom tells me to this day, as she's smoking her cigarette and telling me this, that I would kick the ashtray off her belly. I'm like, Mom, I'm still trying to kick the ashtray off her belly. So it's like, it's crazy part there. So it's like, I had that. And part of that, and she knows, she's heard me on these podcasts too. It's like, her reason for smoking, I believe, is around suppressing deep grief and loss. And so we choose our addictions wisely. We choose those things. So coming from kind of a lineage of a lot of grief and loss in the lineage that I came through, those propensities made me vulnerable in my lifetime as well. It's not that we blame the previous generation, we just recognize where we've come from. Mm-hmm. And so lots and lots of digestive issues. I looked so much like that little, I don't know if you guys ever saw the cartoon, The Hanker for a Hunk of Cheese guy. That is exactly what I looked like as a child. Just this like big round square body on these little stick legs. It was just crazy because I was so malnourished and so sensitive, but we didn't know. I didn't even know officially until my epigenetics came into my life in like 2008 that I actually did have all the genetics for celiac. I suspected it for years, but I would be like, that's really unfortunate as I was eating my sandwich, right? But the type of things we learn and the type of things we sort of ignore or try to ignore, it just accumulate over time. And for me, I had a sort of genetic hiccup that allowed things to accumulate very, very quickly and abruptly. So when I started having periods at 9 years old, when I started having endometrial symptoms at that time, when they put me on birth control pills at 11 to handle my endometriosis symptoms, really strong. This is back in the 80s, guys, or actually late 70s, early 80s. So the amount of hormone was even higher. Things like that, things with an amazing amount of stress and trauma and abuse and toxicity in my household. So every ACE score. If your listeners don't know what an adverse childhood event score is, you can Google that, take your own questionnaire. I had 10 out of 10 of those experiences before the age of 18. So it was like, no wonder the foundation, the soil was really toxic within my body and being. So the first time I was diagnosed with cancer at 14, cervical cancer. Yep. And then it was very about but cancer light, they just went in, cryoed it right out, no problem. Sure. That's how we get done. You're good. Go on with your day. No differences. No one asking what 14-year-olds should have because we didn't know about HPV then. We didn't know any of those things. It didn't occur to anybody to find out why my age range was having those diseases, and it wasn't a quote unquote sexually active person, but thanks to some lovely assault issues, that's where that came to be. And then at 16, it recurred and they're like, well, just hack away more of your cervix. And so I just have kind of this little sad little nub now. But again, they were like, you're good, take on with your life. It still didn't dawn on me. This is back in the 80s. And then when I ended up in college, I spent the first year of college probably because I left a lot of the trauma and a lot of the environment that kept me in a fight or flight place. I believe that's when the disease really was able to express itself. That's my feeling. So when I physically moved to another state and had a new environment with people who did not know anything about me or my story, I could sort of recreate myself. And in doing that, it gave the opening for all of this stuff to really come to the surface and manifest. And by the time it was big enough and loud enough to capture the attention and the proper diagnosis, I'd spent almost 7-8 months in and out of ERs, being told I was histrionic, being given more meds to treat my condition, which just added more fuel to the fire, more drugs to treat those side effects. And then by the time I ended up in the ER, in organ failure, in fluid building up around my heart and my lungs and all over my abdomen, and by the time they realized on some proper testing and proper scanning that I was dealing with terminal stage 4 ovarian cancer, mets everywhere, that's when they're like, sorry, even one dose of chemo will kill you outright. They told me you have about 3 months without treatment. And I'm like, well, how much do I have with treatment? Like, well, we can't give you treatment. You'll have like a week if we give you treatment. You'll be dead from your organs can't handle it. And so now looking back as a doctor, recognizing my symptoms and what I was dealing with, death was imminent any moment. I mean, I was near cardiac tamponade. I had massive malignant ascites. I was extremely cachectic. My blood counts were ridiculously low. My electrolytes were like, I could have a heart attack any second. My sodium levels were like at 124. I mean, this is like insane where I was. My LDH was in the tens of thousands. I mean, it was crazy. My CA125 was over 15,000. It was just insane. I couldn't eat anything, nothing. So lo and behold, I'm sent home to die. And the first thing I do after, of course, the shock of it all, and the rage of it all, was to go to the library and pick up a book. I just kind of was drawn to this area. And the book I picked up was by this crazy Indian guy named Deepak Chopra. Nobody knows who this guy is, right? But in 1991, September of 1991, that's like, this guy was like out of nowhere. And this book, Quantum Healing, kind of jumped off the shelf to me. And I sat down there in the library, in the aisle, and read that book in 2 hours. I'm a speed reader, so that's not weird.
Okay.
It was like a shift. I had my quantum shift. I had my quantum awakening in that moment to realize I'm dying. I'm going to die. So how can I die with the best way possible? So for me, that book was more about how was I going to die on my own terms. I didn't expect to be here having this conversation with all of you 28 years later. So what that did was, I think between that sort of I shift in my consciousness of how to perceive this process and to know how I wanted to learn about it and learn why for myself on my way out. was one change. And then the other big change is because of the ascites and because of all of the symptoms going on with my organ failure, I couldn't eat. And I didn't eat for almost 2 months.
Whoa.
Because if I ate a little bit, even drank a little, I would throw up. So I could really get in sips of water, started adding in sips of teas. And really, I was fasting, which I didn't know that was a possibility. That likely is what stopped sort of the extreme explosion of a process that was happening in my body. Again, hindsight's 2020. So I can say that now looking back. I had no idea. I still feel like I have no idea. So I'm still figuring this out, with all of you on this journey. Lo and behold, that's what it's been. Every time I would learn something new, I would apply it to myself first. And either it worked or it didn't work. And then I'd kind of mental note what that was about and then move forward to the next step. So I always feel like I was just kicking the can a few more feet down the street. That's literally that. And then the experience with tens of thousands of patients and hundreds of thousands of labs that I've reviewed and patterns and story gathering that I have done has helped me see a web, a pattern, a process that isn't unique. How I see the world is not new or different. I'm going back to a way of observation and being present and seeing the world around me in a way that things make sense to me in a very different way than it does for other people, though we are all well adept at seeing it this way. Mm-hmm. And so that's become my life work of helping other people see these patterns within themselves to understand the how and the why they got here and the how and the why they personally, individually need to change their course. And that's just experience and seeing so many patterns over and over. It's not like I have protocols. There are no such thing.
Thank you.
I just sort of go, tend it, right? Right. That drives me crazy. I'm like, if you go to a doctor who says, I have this protocol for you, you should probably run.
Yes,
right?
Thank you.
And if you go to a place, like you go to a cancer center, you go and travel far and wide to a cancer center, and you're getting the same treatment as a stage 1 breast cancer patient as the stage 4 pancreatic patient, you should probably run.
Uh-huh.
Those are the things like, why did they choose that treatment for you? Because I'll have people come to me, their life savings gone. They're like, now I'm really in trouble and I have no money to pay. Now what? And you're like, we could have started to assess, test, assess, and address the terrain in a way that would have allowed you to know precisely where to start on this journey.
Yes.
And have saved you. So people are like, oh, you're really expensive for a consult. I'm like, that investment up front will save you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in the future, to change this out.
Absolutely.
But because you're in that boat, I see the type of questions get thrown at you, and people are like, well, what do you do for breast cancer? And you're like, those questions, like, I'm so patient because everyone has to come to it on their own.
They do. Yeah.
When you see that over and over and you're like, I don't treat cancer.
Yes.
I don't treat breast cancer. And my 11 people are like, have you ever worked with multiple myeloma? Have you ever worked with? I'm like, yeah, I've worked with, I can't think of a cancer I haven't worked with.
Yeah.
But I don't treat that. I treat the person.
Exactly.
And their patterns and their terrain.
So I love where this is going because I really wanted to get into this with people.
Cool.
First of all, there is not a one size fits all approach. Like, let's just dissolve that myth right now. Yeah. And I love that you're inviting people to do that. It's not like the same cookie cutter approach. Like, we can't do that. It's not going to help you. But this approach that you take around the terrain, around addressing the terrain, for people who may be new to that terminology, what is the terrain? And talk a little bit about that for us.
Sure. So I was actually I just returned from Weston A. Price conference. So it's really fun because it's like I don't have to worry about eating or having these conversations because they pretty much get it. A little more carbs than I eat, but I don't eat. I just don't put the bread on my plate. But ultimately, one of the presenters who I've followed his work for years and heard him speak for years and know him, and we were actually on a panel together, Dr. Cowan, Dr. Thomas Cowan, just actually had a really great book. I had the privilege of reading The Galley before it was ever available and make an endorsement and a recommendation before it became available. So I read this about 6 months ago. And really like the way he articulates what he believes cancer to be. And frankly, it comes back to this terrain. So your question is, well, what is the terrain? What is this piece? And so he kind of described, because he gave a little lecture on it this weekend, he talks about sort of our cell, right? And here's this cell that inside the cell, you have this hard drive, which is your nuclei. And it's like a little dot. It's like a dot of the information. And then hanging out within that, you've got all these other little organelles, all these other little kind of mini organs within the cell. A lot of them are your mitochondria. And that's important, right? What those little guys, but what those little cells and that little hard drive are floating around in is the key, the cytoplasm, right? That extracellular or the intracellular and the extracellular matrix. So what is floating around inside the cell, or what's the gel inside the cell that we're hanging out in, plus what's the gel that the cells themselves outside of their cell wall is floating around in. That's where the magic happens. Okay. So when we talk about terrain, this is, I love, and I think you've even posted this, I love that very simple analogy of everyone's looking at the muddy, dirty, yucky, stinky looking fishbowl.
Yeah.
And instead of adding what we would do, even what we do with fish bowls, we add chemicals. We add chemicals to a murky green swimming pool. We add chemicals to our water treatment plants, and we call it good.
Right.
But and we're like, great, we just cleared out the water, but oh man, no one's like looking at the silt that's fallen to the bottom. And like, if you stir those rocks up a little bit, it's even grosser. And then suddenly those fish start to die. Right? This is what's happening. This is the concept. And so you don't just keep adding chemicals to that or just simply pour off some of the water and add in fresh water. That's how we've been treating disease for the last 100 or so years. A terrain concept is take everything out of that bowl, scour down that bowl, explore everything, look into every little bit of the gravel on the bottom of that. Take a look at the health and vitality of the plants that are in that bowl feeding that fish. Take a look at the fish itself and see how it's doing. Look at its gills, look at its skin, look at its, nourishment, run some labs. Look at the food you're feeding it. So what we're talking about here is what is going into that bowl. That's what's important. And what could go into that bowl that we talk about in the book? The 10 main patterns. Believe me, I don't pretend to know all of this, but the 10 patterns that I see most often, your epigenetics, your metabolism, so your sugar, your nutrient fuel sources, your microbiome, your inflammatory markers, your immune markers, your angiogenesis, oxygen, movement, circulation markers, your hormones, your stress response, and your circadian rhythms, and your mental emotional health. So your actual neurotransmitters, as well as just how you see yourself and how you relate in the world. All of that goes into that bowl and creates the health or the disease of that bowl. And if any one of them is off, that fish is not going to do very well. If any one of them. And so when people get so honed in on this single treatment, whether it's standard of care, slash burn poison, which it is. I mean, even Western oncologists call it that. It's not like I'm being
totally, absolutely.
It is. That's what you're doing. The goal is cytotoxicity, which is to cyto-reduce, and you do that with these poisonous methods. Or if people go, oh, I'm just going to go and do Gerson, or I'm just going to go and do keto, or I'm just going to go and pray this away, or I'm just going to, guess what? You're not going to have any benefit because you're not taking a look and really deeply assessing all the components that go into that and addressing any of them that go out of balance, because they're never all going to be in harmony at once all the time. It's a constant, ebb and flow. And you just have to keep addressing and moving with it and following along with the dance and changing it along the way. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about terrain and the metabolic health. And what people like Dr. Cowan will say in his book is sort of the jelly inside that cell and the jelly that those cells are circulating in is where health and disease starts. And he talks about, it's all about our fluid structure, our water body, right? And we think from a lot of ancient therapies, it's like we think about, so this is why probably Heather and I are drawn to going and spending our winters walking barefoot, getting our negative ions from the ocean, is because it talks to our water body. It talks to our cytoplasm in a very different place. And if we look back at our mitochondrial eve, our initial, where did we all come from? Cell line, that started on a coast in Eastern Africa on the water. So we are of the water, we are from the water, and we need the quality of water in our life to keep that cytoplasm, get that fish bowl healthy.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. It's a great explanation, super clear. And, the thing is that, let's say one person has breast cancer, another person has breast cancer. their fishbowl can look very different.
Totally. That's it. Yeah.
So, okay, you started to allude to some of these things in that explanation, but yourself as a naturopathic oncologist, okay, somebody walks into your door, they're ready, like, okay, get my train back on point. It sucks right now.
Yeah.
Okay, where do you look? What are some key areas you start to look at?
Love it. Great start. And first of all, I want to say, and I know you get this as well, every person says to me, I literally can probably think of 2 people in my entire practice that have said differently, but everyone says, but I was healthy until I got cancer. I'm like, oh my God, that was because of all the years of pouring chlorine into your fishbowl. You were not healthy. All right. You just kept, or as Allison Gannett, a good friend. And at this point, we've become good friends after 6 years of her miraculous recovery from applying these metabolic approaches to her own process. And now she coaches people on this journey. But, she uses the analogy, which I love, and I borrow it often, but credit her for it, is, she was always putting the tape over the check engine light on her dashboard of her body, of her car.
Yes.
For years. That's what we all do. We're like, or that, it's like, so we aren't, there's no way you were healthy to get a cancer diagnosis.
Absolutely.
So you have to be willing to already just let that belief system go. Because if you don't, what happens is you then are under the belief system and you severely limit yourself. When you say, I just want to get back to where I was before this diagnosis, I don't know if I can curse on your thing, but I'm like, no. Okay. Like that's what got you here, was where you were before that diagnosis. So
yes. So go back.
You can't, and don't go back. I mean, that's the problem. And so even the American Cancer Society says that 70% of all patients who've been diagnosed with cancer will have it again, because they won't say this. So I'm going to extend that sentence.
Yes.
Because they did not change the terrain. They did not change the soil in which they got sick.
Yes.
Okay. So that's where we start. We start by simply, at the very beginning of my book, I actually have a 10-part questionnaire. And those 10 parts associate with those sort of 10 drops in the bowl or the bucket we just described. And it has sort of 10 questions under each category, so 100 questions total. And you want to go through that first, like your own little inventory, because this is overwhelming, right? I'm not going to pretend that it's not overwhelming, that it's easy, right? So this questionnaire can help you start to go, no one just has one, really, number one. Most people have 2, 3, issues at least going on. So you look at your priority and you start there.
Okay.
Some people, like if they're very sick, if I'm really seeing them at end stage, all 10 are lit up, right? And so they're sort of like, where do I start? I'm like, anywhere, choose one, pick one, right? It's anything. It's like if you tug on this part, all of it's going to respond. None of these happen in isolation. So we start there by doing an internal inventory of your internal self, but also the world around you, what you put in, on, and around your body. That includes the people you spend the most time with. Your listeners, and you probably know of that old saying, sort of like, you are the 5 closest people in your life.
Yes.
You cannot function beyond, like, you hit that ceiling at the level that those 5 closest people in your life are able to achieve.
Yes.
So think closely of who you're hanging with, right?
Yeah. How's it going with your partner? How's it going with your mom? How's it going with your sister?
Yeah, your business partner, even your child. And these are very challenging, because one of the other pieces of my own healing was I had to do a family fast for 2 years. Okay. That's very painful for a lot of people to consider. Absolutely. But it's what I had to do to survive.
And what does that look like for you? Do you mind sharing a little bit?
I don't mind sharing. In that I had to literally, because this is at the time when there were no cell phones, there was no doctor, there was no internet, there was no Facebook. So it was definitely a lot easier to cut yourself off from the world than it is today, right? So I'm mindful of that. But we can also still do that with boundaries, by saying it, because I still articulate very clearly to this day and have very choice, cutting of tethers to people in my life, even in the modern times. But at that time, I literally made my number. You couldn't search for it. You couldn't find me. I made myself unlisted address, unlisted all of that. Moved I was at least in another state already, so that helped, things like that. And I just I had to go into the darkness and start to create my own new family, my own new tribe. I started to have to recreate the 5 closest people in my circle.
Wow.
Because I knew in order to survive that if I tried to do me the way I needed to do me to survive this, it's very difficult. And I'm sure you and your listeners can relate that if other people have opinions about your healthcare choices that are different than your own, you are not going to heal.
Yes, thank you. That's very important to hear. I think that is very important.
Yeah. And there's sometimes we can articulate to a person, I appreciate your belief. I appreciate your concern for me. I appreciate what you know to be true for you, but I need you to not lay that on me.
Yeah.
And if you can't respect that, and if you can't adjust with that, then you need to get the F out of my way. You just got to get out of my way.
Yes.
And you're going to be out of my system because you cannot heal. You are the resonance. You are the frequency. You are the vibration. You are at the level of those people closest to you. And if they aren't on board, this is going to sound harsh. You will not survive this if you've got a stage 4 diagnosis.
I think this is important. This is very overlooked. I can't tell you how many people have come into my practice and been like, oh, my husband and my kids really wanted me to do chemo and radiation. I didn't want to do it, but they pressured me into it, so I did it. And then now they're not alive.
Right.
Well,
right.
I agree. I have seen that so many times. This is a really huge point here.
It is. And it's not easy. And I get a lot of flack for it. And I've had people say easier said than done. I'm like, done it. I know how hard it is. I'm telling you. And to this day, I still go through certain fasts. And I've cut out people of my life that were incredibly dear, close friends that I still love so much. But the toxicity they brought to my life, or the inability for them to see me for who I am now, and your inability to support where I need to go, I can't be. I've kissed my mortality more times than I care to admit, and more times than I care to count, to not want to waste a second. Yeah. And the only time I get really drained today is when I'm wasting time in those places. And it's my barometer. Like some people have herpes outbreaks. I have like emotional depletions. Like that's my inner monitor is like, who's sucking me dry right now? Where am I compromising myself? Where am I not being met, or where am I not being pushed, or where am I not being elevated to the next frequency or held in that space? And I have to constantly prune. I prune in my life all the time, my relationships.
I love that. I think that's a really important process. And I'm going to just give a shout out right here to my partner, because she is a holistic counselor, just very, very, very good at addressing these deeper issues. You all can visit her at jenantill.com. But this emotional piece is so huge when it comes to any healing. But if we're talking about cancer, this is a huge part of the train that you're addressing here that I think is often very overlooked.
You're right. And, it is the 10th drop in our bucket, that sort of mental emotional, which relates to your relationships as well. And I laugh, it's the 10th chapter, but it should be kind of the first chapter. We're humans. We want the tangible, easy, like, let me change the diet. Let me take the supplements. Let me do the thing. Right? Let me get the device. We are so good. And I tell you, I have patients who are like, up to their eyeballs in cool toys and great supplements and eating the best foods, but they will not deal with that emotional issue, or they will not get that husbandectomy, or they will not quit that job that is killing them, right?
Yes.
And even Kelly Turner, in her Radical Remission book, the 9 factors that are the common denominators of people who beat all the odds, only 2 of them are tangible. Diet and supplements, the rest are exactly in the sphere we're talking about. So that is so important. And frankly, people do not want to hear that they have to deal with that stuff. They don't.
No, it's true. It's true. But if we have something like a cancer diagnosis, you are walking, living proof. You are on your deathbed. Did none of the cancer, chemo or radiation, which doctors, it's your choice. If you want to do that, that's your choice. But know that there are other options, and it doesn't mean you're going to die if you don't do those things. And I think a lot of people think that.
Or the other side, like for me, it wasn't like I went out and said, I'm going to do alternative medicine. That wasn't what I did. I was told there's nothing we can do for you. Go home and die. So I was given no choice. So therefore I had to create my own, right? So I'm that person who, I don't think standard of care interventions are necessarily bad. I just don't think they're done properly and done precisely enough. So let me give you an example. Radiation will never work if your insulin is high.
That's great. Good.
Simple things.
And how can people tell if their insulin's high? Let's just give a dead giveaway.
That's good. So check them, like go and have a simple insulin blood test. It's like $13 out of pocket. If you're agonizing over, my doctor won't order it for me, just do a freaking walk-in lab. Forgo your Netflix thing this month and pay for your insulin test, or whatever it is, right? So priorities, right? Reprioritize. So knowing that, because cancer cells are desensitized to the cytotoxic therapies when their sugar and insulin are high. That's across the board in all tumor types and all cancer types, right? And so so I think it's really malpractice that radio oncologists, although I've got a good handful of them in my back pocket now who are really go-to doing this, or getting their patients into ketosis, or at least fasted, or taking exogenous ketones, or making sure their insulin and hemoglobin A1C levels are at a good place so they can start them on radiation and continue through the radiation treatments. And if we see a patient who's undergone radiation and their insulins are high, you have to remember your radiation is still doing its thing for the next 6 months to a year. So it's not too late after you're through the treatment. And guess what? If you start to go back to your cupcakes and ho-hos, whether that's through your potatoes or whatever, I'm kind of using those as examples.
Yes.
After you're done with radiation, thinking, I'm good, I got through my 6 weeks of radiation, now I can go back to business as usual. You unravel all of that in the next 6 months. And so what happens when we desensitize those cells, we also strongly mutate those cells. We make them more aggressive, and we might kill off some of them, but we now have these others that are like waiting for their time to jump again. And so these are examples where we can make standard of care work better for us. The other cool thing is, if I was ever to do radiation, I would only do it with hyperthermia, because when we add it with hyperthermia, you synergize the treatment, you protect the healthy tissues in the micro environment surrounding those cells, you actually drive the radiation like a Trojan horse into the cancer cells, and you create an abscopal, meaning a distant whole body immune effect.
Okay.
So we can be layering low glycemic, go into your radiation treatment fasted, 20 minutes before, take some exogenous ketones to really kick your ketones up to protect the healthy tissues and to really direct the treatment to the cancer cells, and then maintain very low glycemic diet 6 months to a year after your treatment, preferably for the rest of your long, healthy life, but at least for those first 6 to 12 months out. And you're someone who's going to be taking that 70% recurrence rate way the hell down. It's pretty simple.
Yes. And you see, this brings us all back to the question that you talked about in the beginning, where when somebody reaches out and say, I have breast cancer, what do I do? This is very complex. There is so much to this. You just heard how Dr. Winters unfolded this single approach to radiation treatment. I mean, it's very involved. And I think the thing that people need is real help from people who have knowledge around this. You can't just Google ketogenic diet.
Oh gosh, you almost cause more harm than good. Yeah. It's internet keto, right? And it's keto for people who just like want to dump a lot of weight, or carnivore keto. It's like, that's not cancer keto.
Yes.
You need someone who understands the terrain, and you need someone who knows how to help you change, like the Heathers of the world, to change the lifestyle that changes that gelatinous goo that your cells are floating in and that's floating inside those cells. And it's exactly things like light, water, low So what Dr. Cowan talks about in his book is he talks about some of the main components that treat or prevent cancer. And it's the proper type of water, the proper type of sunlight.
Yes.
He's like, you can't, he will tell, he's like the guy who's been at this forever. You cannot do this on a high glycemic diet. It will never happen. You have to be low glycemic, because that jelly inside the cells gets even more bastardized and goes off the tracks even more. And he even said, he's like, everyone's looking at the ketogenic diet, and I love it when he said this, just to starve cancer from the glucose side. That is the tip of the iceberg of what eating a low glycemic diet does. And that's whether you're eating keto or low carb, high fat, or just low carb or whatever.
Yeah.
what you're doing, he says, you're basically plugging this thing into the end of the ATP, and you're changing you're basically you're depleting deuterium, okay? And you're changing the charge in the cell, which is changing the frequency of that cell, which is basically taking it back into harmony, back into resonance, back into balance, instead of out of resonance, which is where disease hangs. So it's like this way of eating is ancestral and ancient and part of all of us, to have gone through moments of feast, famine, have gone through moments of lack. None of us ever in the human history ever ate this much carbohydrate, especially processed carbohydrate. Even the big cultures that have a lot of carbohydrate intake, it's a lot of fiber in the carbohydrate, and it's all about more of their microbiome. But they're also very, very, very physically active in these ancient tribal cultures. When you talk to someone saying, well, what about the whatever people of this region who predominantly eat a carbohydrate diet? Like, look at their lifestyle. Yeah. Look at their sun exposure, look at their sleep patterns and their rhythm in nature. Yeah. That's what's so big. It's like, what are those cells floating in? What is the information coming in? Yes. And that's the key when we start talking about what do you do for breast cancer. It's not about that. It's like, what is your jelly need to make it function better?
Yes. Very well said. I love it. I think it's great for people to hear this. I think for a lot of people, that's really new. Like,
really? Yeah, it's like so second nature to my brain.
Oh,
yeah.
I know, yeah. Me too. But I think with the culture we're inundated with in the medical world out there that a lot of people go to, they don't hear this approach. They don't hear it.
And my hope is between you and your listeners, you recognize that this conversation is above and beyond cancer. It's all for everything. This is about longevity, which in the US, we've gone down 3 years in a row. We're the only Western, like in the Western world, we're the only nation that is shortening our years of living. And others are either maintaining or going up. Wow. And the things that are the two biggest reasons for that in our country is suicide and opiate overdose. And usually those are very hand in hand. It's all about, we have lost our way. We've lost our connection. We've lost our bliss point, and we've lost our, and we're inundated with pain, not just physical pain, but emotional pain. Absolutely. And that is so much more in our power than we're led to believe. Mm-hmm. And it's so much about tending that inner garden. So it takes us back to that mental, emotional drop in the bucket. And to the 9 factors, the 7 of the 9 factors that Kelly Turner talks about, we all need to be tending our mental, emotional garden much better than we've been doing.
Agree. Yeah, that's really huge. I didn't realize that statistic the past 3 years. That's intense. That's a lot. I know a lot in my work. I also contributed to EMF exposure and how much we're living indoor lives and we're not living outdoors anymore. Hence our expeditions to Mexico to be outside. It's like, a lot of people say, well, I could never do that. Well, I don't think I could either, but I have to. Like, I have to make it work to be healthy. So I think there's another link here that to cancer, but to really, I think we can apply this to all chronic disease, is this vitamin D link.
Oh yeah. Oh my word. Yeah.
So this is a huge link that I think is really says a lot when it comes to cancer. I want to hear your take on this. I know you have a lot to say. I had somebody near and dear to my heart just get blood work done, and my vitamin D is a 15. I'm like, oh my gosh, listen, like, you have to come to Mexico with me ASAP. Like,
yeah.
Tell me about vitamin D linked to cancer. Go.
Okay. Well, first of all, you have to remember, I always kind of use the analogy of the little, because I grew up in Kansas, I think that's why I've got a little affinity to Little House on the Prairie and Laura Ingalls Wilder. But 150 years ago, we walked for an average of 4 hours a day. We were outdoors an average of 4 hours a day. That's the average. So obviously some a lot more, obviously some a little bit less. Today in the United States, we are outside less than 15 minutes a day on average.
Whoa, that's insane.
Crazy. And I ask my patients, and in fact, I'm going to tattle on her a little bit, but even my assistant who knows better, I was asking her just recently, like, I'm like, do you get outdoors more? And she's like, I don't. I'm like, change that now. Like, change that now. And people, we forget, right? We forget. And so it's like, even if it's dead cold in the winter, bundle up. One of my favorite things was to be on my balcony in Durango in the morning, the eastern light, wrapped in a blanket, snow billows all around me, wrapped in a blanket up there with just my eyes, facing that eastern light as the sun's rising. Even though it's freezing cold, there's something so exhilarating about that.
Yes.
Breathing that in, having that sunlight hit your face, even if it's a cloudy day, it's still filtering through.
Yeah.
That is so critical. That it was like a must-have start of my day. Today, or starting you and I will be hanging out there just starting on December 1st. My days will be starting on a paddleboard at sunrise, right? So I'll be getting that double whammy of the negative ions of the seawater, but also the red light of the sunrise at that time, which is incredibly helpful. When people say, how do you do it? How did you do 42 talks last year, 36 this year, worldwide, on an airplane constantly, which is massively toxic to my bucket? And this is how I do it. I go to a place that recharges my batteries literally. And I'm outdoors an average of 6 hours a day down there. I move my office outdoors. We're taking the dogs for long walks. We're on the paddle boards. We're in a community where we can walk everywhere. Our truck gets moved pretty much if we are only doing airport runs to go get our friends from the airport to come visit us. That's it. Like, it is our world. I don't wear shoes. Like, these are the things where you don't have to. That is why I do that, to recharge my batteries more than ever. And when you talked about people who can't do it, we reorganized our lives to do it. We rent our house in one place so we can do this elsewhere. It's kind of simple, right? We reorganize. It's the same life. We're still doing the same work, but we're in a physical environment that sustains us. Because I was noticing with my workload over time that I was collapsing within myself by staying home through those cold, darker days. I couldn't recharge as easily as I needed to. So we had to create a lifestyle to support what we needed. So when it comes to that place on the vitamin D, I also learned about myself many, many moons ago, and about 70% of the rest of the population have these significant vitamin D receptor site SNPs, these little genetic hiccups, okay? And they all vary, our RS numbers, so our individual sort of blue, like fingerprint of how that is represented in our body varies. There's a lot of different variations on that theme. And then there's another one called CYPR, CYPR21, which is another one that's around vitamin D synthesis. And so when I have people who do a lab, like your friend, and they see that it's well under 20, first I am looking for cancer in those patients. And I'm not telling people to scare them this, because when your levels drop to that level, you are no longer making proper hormone. You are no longer balancing your blood sugar properly. You're no longer balancing your circadian rhythm properly. You're no longer balancing your immune system properly. Your macrophage, macro 1 and 2 phages, space, the TH1, TH2 balance, all of that skewed or off or completely off the grid altogether. Basically, you're impacting all 10 of the drops in the bucket simply with that vitamin D. So you're making yourself insanely vulnerable to a cancering process when you get down to those levels. And today, like, just to give an example, we had our military back at World War I. Everyone had blood testing, and we banked those for research. Their average vitamin D level was 115.
Oh my gosh. See, that's what I strive for people. 100, 120. I mean, 80 would be amazing,
Exactly. And the caveat of that is that there's a teeny, tiny percent of the population that higher levels can cause harm. But I check 125s. If I see calcium going up in the serum, I'll make sure they're getting K2 and vitamin A to help get the calcium where it needs to be, because calcium needs to be directed. Okay. It's like no one should take calcium, but what calcium we naturally get from our food needs to still be directed and told where to go. And that's done by our other fat soluble nutrients, vitamin D, K2, vitamin A. And if you're vegan, vegetarian, or you're on the low fat craze, or you're terrified of fat, or you have some of these epigenetic hiccups to BCMO1, which is vitamin A synthesis, and KORC1, which is vitamin K synthesis, and these SIPs I talked about around vitamin D3, you need to work even harder to make those things happen for you. And it takes 3 days to synthesize vitamin D on your skin. And since World War I, we started creating detergents and soaps that saponify the natural fats on our skin. Whenever we bathe, we wash away basically the incubator which our vitamin D hangs out to metabolize and be properly absorbed into the body. So I always tell patients just soak your pits and parts, if at all, and just use a loofah and water because you're scrubbing away your vitamin D.
Yeah.
So we can live in, even those living down in Mexico, to the sun exposure, if you're still putting on your sunscreen, if you're still covering up altogether, if you're still soaping up constantly.
Yeah. If
you're not getting vitamin D.
Yes.
Those were things we did not do a generation ago, right? And then, of course, we could go crazy pants on all the types of horrible things in conventional sunscreens today. But ultimately, our skin health and our sun exposure health and the inflammatory reactions we get in our skin based on sun exposure is dependent on our omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids and our hydration status and our good lipid profile, our good fat profile within our cells. So my husband, who used to look like a lobster 2 minutes in the sun when we were both hardcore vegans and vegetarians for years, as soon as we started changing our diet, lowering our carbs, increasing our fat, and really taking in high quality fats and getting our omega-6s down and our omega-3s up, we don't burn anymore. I haven't worn sunscreen in 20 years, right? Yes. And my husband hasn't worn it in 15 years when we really made our dietary shifts. And he's an Irish redhead, freckly guy through and through. I'm a redhead, but I got my Native American blood that takes over a little bit. But knowing this thing, we have to keep these levels. We even have the Vitamin D Council, right, which is part of the NIH, which has even on its own accord said if everybody optimized their vitamin D, and they're saying to the level of 50, right? If everybody optimized it, we would cut all mortality, all chronic illness by 70%.
Whoa. See, you guys, Sunlight RX, here we go. This is huge.
This is huge. And Heather, you're right. The best way is through sunshine. But the reality is if you're outside less than 15 minutes a day and you do all those things to your skin we just talked about, and you don't have a good fatty diet, you have to also supplement. And some of us have to supplement even if we're out in the sun, like myself, because of my we just have to. And you have to make sure your supplements are in oils, like an emulsified oil base. They're taken with a fatty meal for absorption. They're taking with those cofactors, the A and K, to get in. And that's what's really important, because that gel in those cells and surrounding those cells is like a photoluminescence. It's more like a solar panel. That's what I'm going to use it. It's a solar panel. And the way that gel makes energy to charge the rest of the battery to the mitochondria and beyond is from light. And specifically the component that gets kicked up by the light, the vitamin D. And so when we're deficient in that, basically our battery is constantly losing charge and not regulating appropriately.
Yes. Very good. I mean, that's so huge. I mean, just that one thing, vitamin D, what'd you say, 50%, 70%?
Yeah.
Wow. That's huge.
Right?
That's huge. Okay. So that's it. I want to end on two key points here.
Cool.
One, we haven't even really talked that much about diet, which is hysterical, but I think all these other parts are there's no one piece that's more important than another. So I have a Facebook group called the Keto Cancer Solution, and bless everybody's heart who comes on that page. But a lot of people they're misled, they're miseducated with regard to how to utilize a ketogenic diet for cancer. And in my response makes people kind of upset, because I would say I can't tell you how to do keto for cancer because it's going to be different than I tell this person. Right. So let's keep that in mind. I think you agree on that.
100%. It'll be nuanced for sure.
Okay, good. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's explore, just for the listeners, the difference between something like a ketogenic diet versus, let's say, other popular diet for cancer. Let's say the Gerson diet. And today, I think the Gerson diet is very different than how it originated. So maybe share your thoughts here a little bit.
Sure. So we talk about it a little bit in the book about what the Gerson diet was and what it is. I loved that Dr. Cowan got up this weekend at the Weston A. Price conference, and these will be available online someday soon. And he literally debunked the Gerson of today. Like, he's just like, it lost all the point. You have to remember that they were daily juicing raw liver. Okay, which is where, and my only feeling here, and bless Charlotte Gerson, but she must have been so traumatized by liver because she just pulled that out after, and she carried on the routine. And they let go of all the greens, right? They loved to juice, but they stuck with all the sweet juices because that's what's, what people will be compatible with.
Yeah.
And at the time that Father Gerson came out, we were not ingesting 175 pounds of sugar per person per year. So eating a large amount of carrots for the beta carotene, the vitamin A, was not a problem, right? And the other thing is no one was eating processed foods, and there was no iodized salt. There was no Morton's processed white death sea salt or regular salt at that time. So he was even finding the real issue with Gerson was the raw liver, the shift from high sodium chloride to a high potassium diet, and he was low glycemic. He was the original metabolic doctor treatment to all this.
Amazing.
But it has gotten terribly bastardized. And I love that Dr. Cowan got up there and he's like, this was never a vegan diet. And that's how it's being promoted today. It was like, it never was. And just to reiterate, because I know I piss people off all the time, the nutrients that are depleted in our cancer patients: vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin A, B12, magnesium, selenium, and zinc. Okay, across the board. Guess what other populations are very, very depleted in those nutrients? Our vegans and our vegetarians.
Absolutely.
It just is. And so I'm not being dogmatic. Let's test. Like, don't let me tell you, let's just take a look under the hood and see.
Sure.
And then adjust accordingly. You have to be willing, because I was the dogmatic vegan. I was then the dogmatic vegetarian when I was like, well, I'm dying from that, so I'll just add an egg and then I'll be good. And it was still not enough for me, right? I do have vegetarians who are thriving on low carb or even ketogenic, the ketotarian kind of diet, and doing great. But my constitution wasn't. It was just too far down the rabbit hole. I needed a little bit more. And so these are those pieces. So when we talk about the ketogenic diet, one thing I want people to know, because I know that there's other camps out there saying, oh, ketogenic diet can feed cancer. Let me just give perspective here.
Yes.
When you are metabolically flexible, when you are easily burning fat and sugar as your body was built to do, if you literally finish dinner at, say, 6 p.m. and you wake up at 7 a.m., you should be showing some ketones. Yeah. That is when we are metabolically healthy and flexible. So when people say, oh, keto, I'm like, bullshit. And when people talk about that, they're looking at a petri dish, they're looking at a cell line study, they're not looking at the whole organism wrapped around it. We were meant to be a dual hybrid engine at all times. And if you get stuck too hard in any one place for any situation, you're going to create problems. So yes, if you feed a bunch of rats or cell lines a ton of acetoacetate, which isn't even the form of ketones that you need to actually change all the dials on the 10 hallmarks of cancer, can you potentially upregulate things? Yes, you can, as can any individual thing. But none of us, in our powerful glory of the way we were created, to have all these amazing working parts happening unbeknownst to us at all given times, are having those issues. Right? And so when we go back to the rhythm in which we were all made, and we go back to the patterns and the seasons and the nutrients that were rich in our food sources at that time, and we return ourselves back to how we were ancestrally primally made, and we improve upon that with our newer technologies and understandings of things, then we can change the dial on the knob, right? We can change the line on that dial. And it's just so crazy to me that we are fighting over this diet or this diet. Like, what is our final goal? Our goal is to become metabolically flexible again.
Yes.
88. So there's a cool study that came out. I have it on my little poster. I've got that little PDF that Lacey on one of the, shout out to Lacey, on one of the I gave permission to share. That gave the absolute link to the research that shows that 88% of Americans are metabolically inflexible.
I don't even doubt that one bit. That's insane, but I don't doubt it. Wow.
And actually, to me, what's more insane is I'm really hard stretched to believe that 12% of us are.
Yes, I know. I was going to say that.
I'm like, that's even almost more amazing. I was standing next to somebody this weekend at the conference, and someone said, it's amazing we don't all have cancer.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, oh, but we do.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah. And it's like, so what are you doing differently to keep those cells in harmony? To keep that frequency, to keep that the jelly inside those cells and around those cells functioning in a way that they can continue to take out the garbage properly and upregulate energy properly and use nutrients properly and, synthesize sunlight properly and all those different components.
Yes.
That's our job.
Yes.
That's our job, because in the world today, we have to work harder than ever. I hate when I hear colleagues say moderation. We don't have that. We had that luxury 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury today.
Totally agree.
We have to work a lot harder at it today. Yeah.
Awesome. So if you all want to work on your terrain, go to Amazon, purchase the Metabolic Approach to Cancer, take the quiz, start at these root levels to address why you personally have cancer or how you can prevent the disease, and really how you can prevent any disease simply by addressing these core elements of the terrain here. Oh man, such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for taking time out of your day to connect and share with us all.
Yay. And I'll see you down south soon.
Yeah, we'll see you down south. We'll have to do a show down there for everyone. And maybe a little series for everyone. This was really cool. This is great. Foreshadowing.
Definitely. I love it. I'm loving it. The ideas are starting to weave here. I just wish you so much love and success in the support you're offering to so many, because you're helping people just remember our innate wisdom. That's what you're helping people do. And that takes a lot of burden off myself and other medical providers, because we need someone out there in the trenches with the patients, helping them know how to change this up. Because then when we come in and sort of assess it from that very medical, perspective, bird's eye view, and start to implement the more aggressive tools that may be necessary, if you're still applying those tools on a broken terrain, you're not going to get very far. And so that's where we need the biohackers of the world to help us really change the terrain to have better response to whatever therapies you choose to utilize. So thank you, everybody, for that. And Heather, thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining me for this episode with Dr. Winters today. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing the interview. It was really fun, but also we got a lot of truth bombs. We got a lot of information from Dr. Winters about approaching cancer from this holistic, well-rounded root place that she addresses and refers to as the terrain. And you can learn more about her approach to cancer by grabbing a copy of her book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for everyone. But really, no matter what health issue you're struggling with, whether it's sleep disturbances, things like insomnia, constipation, leaky gut autoimmunity, we really can apply this aspect of addressing your terrain to get to root underlying causes as to why you personally are experiencing the health issues you are today. Not everybody has breast cancer for the same reason. Not everybody with leaky gut has leaky gut for the same reason. Not everybody with rheumatoid arthritis has that condition for the same reason. So, as we talked about in this episode today, we never want to give a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach to anybody's healing path. This is why when people ask me, what food should I eat? What diet should I eat? This is really a much more complex question than many people are aware of today, because one person's medicine in a food, in a supplement, can be another person's poison who has the same exact issue going on. So this whole approach of addressing the terrain, as Dr. Winters calls it, I simply refer to it as getting to the root cause of your health issues, which are multiple in nature. There's never a one cause or one reason as to why somebody gets cancer, why somebody gets Parkinson's, why somebody gets type 2 diabetes, why somebody has Crohn's, etc. And so taking this more expansive, global, holistic view of the body is really how we can get to these deeper root causes of why you're experiencing what you are with regard to your health. So there were a lot of resources and name drops in this episode. I'll be sure to link those in the show notes for you all. If you want a copy of the show notes, go to my site, heathershepherd.com, HEATHAR. Shepherd, SHEPARD.com, and go to the podcast tab. You'll be able to click down and subscribe to getting the podcast notes that you'll not only get for this episode, but all future episodes as well. So go ahead and do that so you can get the resources listed here. I'll list Dr. Winters' book, and I'll list my partner, Jen Antil, her site for holistic counseling. She does distance sessions with people. So even if you live in Australia or England or Chicago, you can book a holistic counsel session with Jen. Also, on the show notes, I'm going to list my recommended labs for anyone, but also for people with cancer. So I'll list the most common labs to get, and these aren't as intricate as you think. So I'm not even interested in going the route of, let's look at your genetics or SNPs. Really, we can do very simple labs, CBCs, lipid panels, TSH, thyroid panels. We can look at some things like ferritin. We can look at your serum copper levels. We can look at your HbA1c. There's a few others, HSCRP. These things are really huge and tell me so much as to what's going on at the mitochondrial level. How is your mitochondria metabolizing? How much water is it producing? How is your environment, your light and EMF environment, impacting your labs? So I'll put all of these up in the show notes for you all so you can take these into your doctor and say, hey, next time we do lab work, I really want these tests ran. And just keep in mind that many doctors have yet to be aware and have a knowledge of how to interpret blood work down to the mitochondrial level. So once you have your blood work results, I would highly recommend finding somebody has this awareness and knowingness around how to interpret the blood work down to these deeper mitochondrial root issues. For example, you can get a lipid panel done, which is your cholesterol panel, and have an LDL below 200, and your doctor will tell you you're fine, when to me an LDL below 200 means, okay, your mitochondria is significantly lacking in energy production, and we need to take a close look at this here. So that's just one example. Your physician, be it functional medicine or alternative, or conventional, they likely will simply look at something like a lipid panel and they'll just apply that to, oh, how's your heart health? This is a very limited approach to the lipid panel, which I'll have to do a whole episode dedicated to that because it's very intricate with regard to what it reveals about mitochondrial health. But this is just an example. So when I list these labs for you all, keep in mind that you're going to want to have someone help you interpret what they really mean down to this mitochondrial level. Reach out to Dr. Winters, reach out to myself. We can help you with these things in very, very profound ways. During the next episode, I'll be sharing a very important topic with you all called melanopsin dysfunction. We're going to tackle this topic and the great importance of it. This is the very first step. When there's any chronic disease in place, typically 99% of the time, melanopsin dysfunction has already occurred and is weakening the system, is weakening the hormones and the metabolism. And I'm going to go into great detail as to how that happens. How do you get melanopsin dysfunction? What does that even mean? I'm going to break it down to you in really simple terms during the next episode. And this is going to help you get to root aspects of the terrain that help rectify and prevent chronic diseases, including cancer. Okay, for those of you who like to be social, you can follow me on Instagram at sunlight_RX. You can follow me on Facebook at Heather Shepherd. And for those of you who are looking to take your sunlight exposure up several notches and use it to actually improve your terrain and to actually remove root causes of your health issues and struggles, I cannot encourage you enough to join my Sunlight RX community. It's literally $12 a month. You can cancel at any time. if money's tight for you, you can go on to the Sunlight RX, literally join it for 1 month and learn the very basic outline of the Sunlight RX in the very first post there. Now I post, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a month on that site, covering various different aspects of the health and how to use sunlight to improve things like vitamin D levels, thyroid function, cancer, leaky gut, gut autoimmunity, etc. So you can hop over to patreon.com/sunlightrx to join me there and learn how to really amp up your sunlight exposure, even if you live in New York, even if you live in Chicago, even if you live in Alaska or Portland, Oregon, or Ireland. You can learn how to utilize sunlight to help facilitate healing in your body. Thanks again for joining me today, and we'll see you next time. The Primal Pioneer podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. This podcast, including all guests on the show, are not offering medical advice or treatment in the Western medical sense or terms. The Primal Pioneer podcast is for informational and educational purposes only.